Good evening, Dungeon Masters. I'm Baron Durop. While there's no shortage of advice on the internet for good dungeon design, there's very little information about different dungeon design frameworks. These frameworks are systems we can use to rapidly flesh out our dungeons in a coherent structure that leads to quality gameplay. In fact, outside of John 4's 5-room dungeon concept, it's almost like they don't even exist at all. Funnily enough, however, there are foolproof level design frameworks used in the video game industry that for some reason get no discussion in the TTRPG scene, yet would be incredibly useful for these needs. Every good platforming video game, especially those from the Super Mario franchise, follows a particular formula that gradually warms the player up to increasingly difficult challenges. These challenges capstone with a final boss or environmental gauntlet for the player to overcome. To demonstrate this, let's look at one of the greatest platformers of all time, the 1985 release of Super Mario Bros. For the NES. Right in the first moments of the game, the player must figure out how to travel rightward across the screen and jump on top of a Goomba. For overcoming the admittedly simple environmental challenge of moving right and then jumping on a Goomba enemy, they then receive a mushroom power-up to become Super Mario. Next, the player navigates jumping over pipes, then pipes with Goombas, then bottomless pits with Goombas that fall from higher elevations. After navigating these escalating problems, the player is finally rewarded with a Fire Flower to become Fire Mario. This escalating stakes process iterates over the entire game, such that by the time the player reaches the castle in World 8, the player is able to navigate every challenge imaginable, including spinning fire bars while swimming underwater. To use this concept in our own dungeon design, we'll need a series of 4 or 5 interconnected rooms. In the first area, we will place an introductory enemy, something simple like a ghoul. After a brush with this foreshadowing enemy, they enter the next area filled with various traps and an obvious switch or lever that disables them. Make sure to place the switch such that it's easily found but only accessible after the players manage to navigate past a handful of traps. In this way, learning to toggle the environmental hazard on and off becomes its own reward. Alternatively, you could also allow the players to find a few potions of fire resistance as a reward. In the next area, we can recycle the prior monsters and environmental elements to combine them together in a way that raises the stakes. Here, the dungeon suddenly comes alive with a horde of ghouls that's also filled with various fire traps. The characters must scramble to deal with both the ghouls and the fire traps at the same time. If they're smart, they might even figure out how to toggle the traps on and off at the right moment to help the ghouls return to their normally dead state. Once this short series of challenges is resolved, we can give the players some meaningful treasure, perhaps a reusable magic item. After this, it's time to escalate the stakes yet again. In the next room, we add another enemy, such as some undead stingbats, and a new environmental hazard, like a series of cliff faces, connected together with rickety bridges. Once the players make their way through this series of challenges and perhaps pick up a health potion as an intermittent reward, we can finally combine all of these enemies and hazards together for maximum effect. This final area consists of ghouls and stingbats attacking the characters while trying to traverse a flammable wooden bridge as fire traps blast them from every direction. Their head will be on a swivel, looking for a switch to turn off the traps before they fall to their death. This escalating series of challenges will make the massive pile of treasure they get at the end of this dungeon that much sweeter. While the first proto 3-lane first-person shooter multiplayer maps emerged with the likes of Counter-Strike's Dust 2 in 1999, the concept of 3-laning as a design paradigm really took hold in 2009's release of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. The formula takes an environmental idea like Dust 2's Middle Eastern market with 2 main narrative focal points, a side street and a cluster of small buildings, and connects them together with 3 major lanes of possible movement. Then, each of those lanes are further connected to each other with shorter, less conspicuous paths. This allows FPS map designers to create dynamic multiplayer maps suited for all styles of FPS action, whether it be snipers in an open clear lane, semi-automatic rifles and carbines in a somewhat covered mid-range lane, or shotguns and submachine guns in the more cramped winding paths of the tight lane. All this said, these concepts don't strictly have to be used for first-person shooter games. At roughly the same time of Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 started solidifying these ideas into a design pattern, especially with multiplayer maps like High Rise, other game developers were using similar ideas for entirely different genres. The map design used in many League of Legends maps makes use of a bot lane, mid lane, and top lane, along with a winding maze of thematic terrain in the middle called the jungle. Each of these lanes have their own separate playstyle needs and ways to jump between the 3 lanes over the course of the matchup. So let's apply this 3-lane framework to a dungeon of our own. We need 2 larger thematic concepts, which we will connect together with 3 separate narrative ideas, each with contrasting environmental problems to solve. First, we'll establish a thematic entrance to this crypt, something with a foreboding stone door that opens to a vaulted gallery covered in hieroglyphics depicting flows of magma and the interred warlord's accomplishments. We need to do some foreshadowing for the rest of the dungeon after all. Next, our 3 lanes will wind through the dungeon till they connect to the warlord's burial chamber and treasure vault, where the warlord's corpse is currently waiting to be disturbed. We can steal that prior platformer idea of the flame trap crumbling cavern infested with ghouls and stingbats and isolate each of some of those themes, the undead infested crypt and the crumbling flame trapped platforms, into each their own lane. One lane would be a standard issue crypt, a maze of niches filled with bones, desiccated corpses, and of course, hordes of skeletons and ghouls, and the occasional wraith to attack the party from all sides. The third route leans heavily into the volcanic and fire-based theme. This room opens over a short series of ledges that drop into a lava flow below. Taking this route would avoid the fire traps and winding halls filled with skeletons, and is technically much shorter, but traversing the slippery ledges would likely mean certain death in case of failure. Once we've established the 3 main paths, it's just a matter of connecting them together to create ease of transfer from one route to the next. This gives the characters the option to change directions midway through the puzzle, or use the environment of one lane to solve the problems presented in another. Players may figure out how to use magic to drag the skeletons into the lava pit, for example. Before I show you the last dungeon design pattern, I'd like to invite you to Green Dragonfest this year in Knoxville, Tennessee from April 30th to May 3rd. You'll have the opportunity to play games with some of your favorite game designers and YouTubers. Professor Dungeon Master, Bob Worldbuilder, Dungeon Dad, and the author of Shadow Dark, Kelsey Dion, will all be running games at this fantasy-themed retreat. Last year, I had a prior guest say that the weekend consisted of the best TTRPG gameplay they have ever experienced in their life. So if you want to be a part of this all-inclusive experience and play with some of the greatest game masters I can find, click the link below or visit greendragonfest.com to register for this year's event. There are only 18 tickets remaining, so register now before they all sell out. The lock and key framework has been around since Link found a key in a dungeon and used it to unlock a door in the very first Legend of Zelda. However, the concept really started to solidify as an environmental design principle later in the Zelda series, particularly in the 1998 release of Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. In a lock and key style dungeon, a barrier to a reward, and perhaps even the reward itself, is made clear to the players almost immediately after they enter the dungeon. Once the players understand the stakes of the puzzle, that is, they understand the puzzle itself and get a hint of the reward, they're given enough environmental cues to help them find the proverbial key elsewhere in the dungeon. We can see this immediately in the Great Deku Tree's entry chamber. When Link first enters the dungeon, the player is shown a hole in the floor covered in thick webbing, the lock, and then is led to where the key is through clever cinematography. The high point Link must jump from to break through that webbing. This kind of puzzle is revisited elsewhere in the dungeon when Link must use fire to burn through more webbing and then navigate with a flaming Deku Stick across a flooded section of dungeon to burn through yet even more webbing. Over the course of the dungeon, Link must use 3 different keys to unlock the same proverbial lock in different ways. To return to our example, we can very quickly add a lock and key design pattern to our dungeon by leaning into the core themes we've already established: lava flows, collapsing bridges and pillars, and those surprise incorporeal undead. To do this effectively, we need to present the locked area to the players early in their dungeon exploration. Let's show them something interesting, but out of reach, and they'll want to figure out how to access it. First, let's shift the final tomb and vault so that it's on a visible platform much higher than can be reached with a grappling hook. In front of this platform, we can place some sort of ectoplasmic barrier, made of the undead spirits of the warlord's enemies, perhaps emanating from some sort of arcane orb. Attempting to move through this barrier might cause a permanent hit point loss, strength score drain, or even level drain if you want to be really nasty. Then below the tomb's precipice, let's add a lava flow that makes climbing up the cliff face nearly impossible. This effectively locks the area with 2 separate locks. Now it's time for the keys. Elsewhere in the dungeon, the players will likely learn that they can strategically knock into crumbling precipices and drop basalt boulders into the lava flows below. Doing this strategically will resolve one of those lock and key problems by blocking the lava flow around the elevated tomb. In the crypt section of the dungeon, however, we can add a magic item that empowers the turning of undead such that it vaporizes turned wraiths and shadows rather than just making them flee. This magic item would make the encounter in that room much more manageable and becomes the proverbial key to unlocking the remaining barrier at the inner tomb's entrance. All this said, the players can still use teleportation magic to reach the platform and bypass this lock and key nonsense. But then the ghostly barrier is still active and the lava flow is still bubbling below, where still the players will have burned through at least a handful of powerful spells figuring out how to get beyond the locks in the process. Do they really want to be up there with the undead warlord who's eager to push them through the wraith wall and into the lava below? Whenever you use a lock and key style design pattern like this, it's always smart to signpost the danger on the other side, and that bypassing the locks is likely a dangerous move, even if the players come up with clever ways to get around the problem. The decision is ultimately theirs to make, however. As you can see, there are many more level design concepts usable for making dungeons outside of the 5-room dungeon framework. When you start using these kinds of level design patterns for your own dungeon layouts, especially when you start mixing and matching them together, you'll end up with a quickly scaffolded dungeon made from tried and true components. If you would like to learn more about those 5-room dungeon concepts, check the link on your screen now. Otherwise, if you'd like to stay up to date with more content like this in the future, please consider signing up for my newsletter at the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night.